Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, a place where you can come to get what you need to move yourself forward. As you know, my name is Mary Baker, and I'm here to give you the education, the tools, and the motivation to identify exactly what's in your way today and what you can do about it. Because remember, empowerment comes from doing, truly identifying what's really going on, what's really causing the issues, and, most importantly, the positive changes you need to make so you can increase your self-confidence and take charge of your life. Okay, so if you've been with us so far, you know that in each episode, we're going to be talking about the building blocks to empowerment, because I think each one of them really matters, and I really believe that you can fix this. So today I'm really excited to get started on one of my favorite topics, healthy boundaries. I think in terms of healthy relationships with ourselves and others, I think healthy boundaries are one of the core foundational pieces. Because I think without boundaries, we can't have self-confidence, we can't have empowerment, and we certainly can't have peace and connection and trust in our relationships. Because boundary work is such a big and important topic, and because I think it's such a huge paradigm with a million facets to it, I'm going to devote the next 2 months to it. And we'll be talking about it forever after that, believe me, even when we dig into other areas. Okay, but first some announcements. I want to remind you guys that those of you who have not jumped on the Facebook group, come on in. The link is in the show notes at www.ownitpowercast.com. Go over there and I'll have the rest of the resources from today's episode there. So there you can also sign up to receive the weekly newsletter. And don't worry, I only send you one thing a week, if that. But that's where you can get all the cool downloads for each of the episodes. You can really take this work and dig deep. I also just want to continue to thank those of you who have been giving me wonderful feedback around how this podcast has been so helpful to you. I'm so glad. Okay, so I think that boundaries can be so misunderstood and misconstrued. So today we're just going to talk about defining boundaries. And boy, we could take 3 hours just to do that. So I'm just going to go over the concept itself. And then in the episodes to come, we're going to parse out individual aspects of boundaries. So if you're feeling a little confused or overwhelmed this episode, it's okay. It's all good. And there's some great resources in the show notes that'll help you take the work further. So Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines a boundary as something that indicates or fixes a limit or extent. It says where something begins and where it ends. So when we talk about boundaries, I want to get into some of the areas, and I won't touch on all of them here, but here are some of the big ones. So you can start to get a sense of what these are, where yours are, and wherever you are is okay. And wherever you are on the continuum in your boundary work is fine. I don't think a refresher on boundaries can hurt any one of us. I think it's extremely helpful. I also believe that if you sit there with a situation and there's lots of chaos and drama going on, if you sit there long enough and boil it down, you can identify the boundary struggles or issues or whatever that are at the core of all that stuff. It's pretty neat. So the first one is your emotional boundaries. Those are your feelings. Those are your feeling states. You know, where are you? And no one has a right to tell you what to feel or that your feelings are not okay or that they're crazy or invalid. The other area, which is the most obvious one, right, is physical area. So that means your body, your home, your space on the couch, your things, your bags, your purse, your car, things that belong to you that are physical, tangible. You can touch them. The third one is psychological. How you see the world, how you see yourself, Do people just barge in the middle of, when you're in the middle of something? Do they walk in the room and start talking without even asking to see if you have a moment? Your time is yours to decide what you devote that to. Your energy as well. What you devote, even your emotional energy, to something. It's important to really keep tabs on that. Healthy relationships, you don't feel zapped, usually. It's usually the unhealthy relationships where you feel the energy draining out of you. And we only have so much energy. So all these things are like finite resources. Speaking of resources, what about your money and the things that you have to give? Are those respected? What about your beliefs? And these could be your beliefs about life itself, like life is good, people are good, beliefs about you, what you think and feel about yourself, what you believe about yourself, your capabilities. What about your choices, right? That's a whole other area. And your behaviors, how you behave, good, bad, or indifferent. So you can see these are some of the areas of where boundaries exist or don't in our life. And so it's really helpful to boil down in any given situation. Okay, where are the boundary areas where this is a problem? Am I taking good care of my boundaries in this area? One of the resources that I have in the show notes is Cloud and Townsend Boundaries. They've written a bunch of boundaries books. Henry Cloud and John Townsend. One of the caveats is they are Christian psychologists, but their stuff is so good. Their clinical material is amazing. So what I always tell clients is, if that's not your jam, just skip over those pieces. It's pretty healthy spiritually, so most people tell me what they got out of it was worth it. So you can skip through and take what you need and leave the rest behind. What they talk about is there are two types of boundaries, and I think this is important. The first one is defining boundaries. Defining boundaries are standards, your standards that don't change, no matter who is on the other side of them. They clearly define your standards. You have thought them through. They can and should align with your values and beliefs, too. Your defining boundaries speak volumes about how much you honor and value yourself. So your time, your body, your heart, your hard-earned money, your home, your mind, and your dreams. It's your job to define the boundaries around those. Some of the examples of good defining boundaries are, I don't allow others to abuse me, either verbally or physically. I don't stay in relationships where there are no boundaries. I don't allow others to disrespect me, my time, or my energy. And I certainly don't allow others to tell me what I think, do, or feel, or what I should think, do, or feel. Here's where loving yourself is so huge, I think. What are your standards? And don't beat yourself up if you haven't really given this thought before, because you can do it today. It's so cool. Getting really clear and really solid what your standards are and should be is so important. And sometimes it comes from the work. Sometimes you have to hear other people tell you, whoa, wait a minute, you deserve better. And that's okay. Oftentimes when I do empowerment groups, I hand out what's called the Bill of Rights. They're called affirmations of some basic rights. I found them online a long time ago, and the author is anonymous. So I'm going to go through some of these. You can download the whole list when you sign up for the Tribe newsletter. Here are some of them. Nobody has the right to know my mind or my business or to tell me what to think, what to feel, or what to do. I have a right to own my thoughts, feelings, values, and beliefs. What I share with others about matters that concern me is determined by what feels right to me, not what they want. Now here's that detachment piece, remember? Just because they doesn't mean I. If people are abusive or disrespectful to me, I have a right to tell them so. And I have a right to ask them to stop, and I have a right to avoid them. I don't have to be nice to people who aren't nice to me. And I don't need to be abused or be disrespected. No one does. I don't have to feel guilty for not behaving as others might want me to, or for not giving others what they expect from me. So there are more on that list, and it's just a great list. And some of them you might look at and say, of course. Others you may not have really thought about, or maybe you've just been paying lip service to, but is that evident in your life? So the other type of boundaries that Cloud and Townsend talk about are called protective boundaries. Now, protective boundaries are ones that you put up and maybe keep up until someone can get their shit together. They're meant to protect you from another's bad choices so that they don't take you down with them, or at least not all the way. This is not always clear-cut, I know, because sometimes there are shared resources in a family like money, home, and kids, but it can still be done. Now, this is not meant to punish another person. It's really about you detaching from their choices and making sure, as much as you can, that you are not as directly affected. Some examples of protective boundaries are no longer sharing a bank account because your partner or your spouse keeps blowing money, won't put their check in there, won't help manage finances, and you just can't trust them. So until they can get it together money-wise and go figure that out and earn back the right to share a bank account with you, you may put boundaries up around that. Another way is asking someone to leave. Asking them to find a couch to live on for a while until they can take you seriously. Maybe putting an employee on written notice so you can have a means to fire them if you need to down the road, unfortunately. Asking your teenager for the car keys back until they can show you better grades or better behavior or ability to come in on time. And then there's the atom bomb boundaries. If all else fails, if people cannot hear you and take you seriously, maybe it's leaving the relationship, asking for a separation or a restraining order. Again, this is not to punish. It's only to draw a line in the sand so folks can get serious about what they want to choose. Everyone gets to choose with healthy boundaries. That is so key. So boundaries are about telling others about you and making it real. This is the truth about you, not about them. See, then the ball goes to them and they get to choose. It may be hurtful, but it is so respectful. Okay, now I want to talk about what boundaries are not, because, wow, I get this all the time when I do relationship coaching. They are not control. They are not control. If someone is simply telling you about them, then they are practicing healthy boundaries. Now, if they start telling you about you, then that is control. For example, if a friend of yours says, I don't want to come over tomorrow, they have every right to say that. They have every right to do what they want. Now, they have their own bennies and consequences around that, right? I mean, they may have promised you they were going to show up and they didn't, and you may not be able to trust them. That's their business. Let them figure it out. It's their choice. Now, your feelings about their choice are yours. Do you see the separation? Do the who owns what? Because boundaries are all about detachment. They're all about healthy separateness, where you end and others begin. Your thoughts, your feelings, your choices, your behaviors, your beliefs are separate from their thoughts, feelings, choices, behaviors, and beliefs. And no matter what you think of them, about others, that's about them. Your business is taking care of yours. All right, so the immediate objections that may come up are, this feels really harsh, this feels uncaring and selfish. Now, this is especially normal if you grew up in a passive-aggressive family that messed up your idea of what quote-unquote real love is. I'm pretty firm about it. I think anything outside of real tough love is manipulation on somebody's part. Like if I don't want to hurt someone's feelings, I'm trying to control that outcome. I'm manipulating. Another fear is I'm going to blow things up. People are going to hate me. It's going to be awful. They might leave. Yep, you might be right. That's what keeps us from doing it because we're so afraid of fallout or conflict, people leaving us, abandonment. But ideally, we want to work on learning how to detach and allow other people to have their choices, even if it is a train wreck in slow-mo. Maybe they need to walk through that. So some of the distortions around healthy boundaries, of course, get formed in childhood. And I've spoken to some of this in the first 4 or 5 episodes around childhood origins of unhealthy behaviors. And as we go through the next 2 months, I do encourage you to look back and see where this stuff comes from for you. Again, this is not to blame your family, just to understand. A lot of families don't have boundaries. The families who are most dysfunctional have the fewest boundaries, I think. And of course, then they didn't model them for you. There was often people walking on eggshells. There was chaos. Stuff was allowed to go down that shouldn't have. Or maybe just the message, it was mean or selfish or uncaring not to rescue someone from their own bad behavior. To not drop everything that you need to do today to help your sister because she can't get her shit together. Maybe your boundaries were ignored when you tried to speak them, or God forbid, violated. And then, of course, empathy isn't there. There was no mirroring for your feelings. There couldn't be. You have to have detachment first in order to have empathy, I think. You know, I can't make someone's feelings about me and then show them empathy around their feelings at the same time. That's really difficult. Maybe you heard these messages either overtly or covertly. You're too sensitive when you get upset. You always make a big deal about stuff. It's not a big thing. What's your problem? Everything's fine. Nothing to see here, people. So as you look back, I encourage you to try to unearth some of the origins of maybe why you struggle, and don't be hard on yourself. Don't. A lot of times when I work with clients, guilt will come up when they're like, oh my gosh, I never set standards for myself. That's okay. You would have if you were taught to do so, and if your standards were honored the first 18 years of your life. That's where it would have to have come from. And the cool thing is you can start doing it now. You know, forgive yourself. Work through that grief, but forgive yourself for that. That's a part of the process. One of the other things that Cloud and Townsend talk about that, you know, if it's hard for you to say no to people, it's probably really hard for you to hear no. And I think that's a harder thing to swallow for people because they don't want to admit that. But that's often true. And the other thing, and we'll get to that in upcoming episodes, is there are external boundaries that I set with others or they set with me. But then there's also internal boundaries, which is my self-discipline. And again, we will devote a whole session to that. Okay, so I want to move on to, I think, a wonderful list from Cloud and Townsend in their Boundaries book. And it's called The 10 Laws of Boundaries. And I want to attribute this to them. So I'm going to go through all of them. And again, you can find these in their book and their workbook. The first one is the law of sowing and reaping. So what that means is there's cause and then there's effect. And that not only do we have to reap what we have sown, for good or for bad, it's about detaching and letting go of someone else's sowing and reaping. And what I tell people is, because they start freaking out, like, oh my God, this can be awful for them. They'll lose their job. They'll do this. Yeah. And maybe they need to walk through this. This is not wishing harm on anyone or ourselves, but maybe they need to sit in the consequences for a while so they can make a decision to want to live better. Does that make sense? To pull that thought all the way through. Why might this awful scenario be for my child's highest good, for my husband's highest good, for my employee's highest good? And think that all the way through. The second one is the law of responsibility. You got to take responsibility for your boundaries. Even though, like we talked about in the past, it's so juicy to want someone to come rescue you from saying no, but you are responsible for your boundaries and other people are responsible for theirs. 3, the law of power. Am I powerless over my behavior, or can I become more responsible? What do I have the actual power to do? And those are things that are within your control, which is everything inside of your skin, right? Anything outside of that, you don't have control. Control is an illusion. Any nouns that exist outside of you. The law of respect is the next one. We condemn other people's boundaries. Well, how are you going to expect them to respect yours? Double standards don't work. The law of motivation. Check your motives at the door. Why are you setting this limit? And again, that can go back to, am I secretly trying to control or get people to do stuff? Go back to the drawing board. You might need to do some more work around that. What's your real agenda? If it's to take care of yourself, you're good. The key here is to set the boundary and let the chips fall. Let the outcomes be the outcomes and don't try to manipulate those, i.e. risk in your relationships, right? And I know that's scary, but that's the only healthy way to do it. A big one, I think, the next one is the law of evaluation. And that means there's a big difference between hurting someone and harming them. Yeah, you're going to hurt my feelings if you tell me the truth sometimes, or you call me out and say, look, Mary, this doesn't work for me, but you're not harming me. Harming is leaving a 4-year-old in Walmart at 10 o'clock at night or stepping over an injured person on the sidewalk. That's harm. There's a difference between hurt and harm, and a lot of people have that messed up because their family messed it up for them. So think it through. Is it hurt or is it harm? How do you know? If you're not sure, check it out with someone who has good boundaries and they can help you clarify. Another big one is the law of proactivity. And what that means is instead of reacting and setting boundaries at the 11th hour and doing the drive-by and saying, oh, by the way, I can't come over tomorrow. Even though everyone starts there when they start setting boundaries, and it's okay. We don't want you staying there. We don't want you blowing up after the fact like, I can't believe you did that, and getting angry at people. Want to take responsibility for being proactive. It's like, did I ask for what I needed from them, or was I expecting them to read my mind? So trying to be really proactive with your boundaries. Let people know as soon as you know. Maybe you need to turn down that invite. Maybe you need to change your mind. 9 times out of 10, people say yes to things in the moment because they're afraid not to. Then they're off by themselves 10 minutes later when they get off the phone and like, oh crap, I don't want to go do that. That's when you pick up the phone, if you can, and give people as much heads up as is appropriate and as much heads up as you would like to have in order to make different plans. That is so respectful. So that's what we want to aspire to. Be respectful, give everyone heads up, take responsibility. The next one is a law of envy. Instead of focusing on what other people have and what you don't, you take responsibility for taking action, for taking care of your own life. Now, I think, envy is a good piece of data. They have something that you want to have for yourself, and it is no longer about them, no, is it? 10, the law of exposure. You have to speak your boundaries. Again, people cannot read our minds. We wish they would, so we wouldn't have to face any possible conflict or people being disappointed in us. Our fear of anger is a big one. Our fear of rejection and abandonment is another big one. The law of exposure means your boundaries need to be made visible and communicated. Okay, so those are the 10 laws. Think about, which ones are easy for you, a no-brainer, which ones, if you got really honest, are tough. And it's okay to get a little pissy when you read this list because you're like, I don't like these. It's okay. It's all good. So there's another resource that I'm pulling from today. And again, there are so many great resources for boundaries out there. And please grab whatever works for you. But Charles Whitfield has written a lot about mental health and recovery from abuse and boundaries over the years. And in his book, Boundaries in Relationships, Knowing, Protecting, Enjoying the Self, it's an older book, but he talks about the idea of boundary in this really cool way. It's like the role of a human cell. He says, each cell in our body has a distinct role, and it knows what it is. It knows what it isn't. It knows what it must keep away from itself in order to survive. A cell defines its existence by separating itself from other cells. There you go. It has good contact as its semi-permeable membrane. So in other words, it lets the nutrients in and tries to keep the poisons out and gets rid of waste. A healthy cell discriminates between good and bad. And he says, like cells, people have behaviors. A healthy person is flexible and adaptable. They use assertiveness without aggression, without acting out. They're expressive in a straightforward way. They're sensitive to how they come across. But they're firm, respectful, tender, and strong. Wow, I love that. That is so cool. Membranes, people. membranes, not rigid walls made of fear, I think, to keep everything out. Work on letting more good in and keeping the bad out, or kicking the bad out if you've already happened to let that in. He says there are 3 things you need to do. Define yourself. Get those defining boundaries going. Know that you have a self and have a healthy self. So get inside yourself, he says. He says when we look outside of ourselves, like I've talked about before, we can't be as aware of our inner self. And the less we are aware of our inner self, the less we are aware of where our boundaries are. And that is so true. Because without an awareness of boundaries, we can become enmeshed in a net of whatever is out there, including the bad. Guys, that's why at the end of each episode, I say keep the focus on you, or keep focusing on you. That's where the magic is, and it's the only place where there's healthy power. So today we got into the broad brush stroke of boundaries. Such a huge, huge concept, as you can see. And that's okay. I think that boundary work, what I tell my clients is give yourself a year or 2 to really get it down, to work on all the many facets of it, all the layers, all the pieces. You know, usually we notice the obvious stuff first. You know, people can't steal your things. Okay, that's obvious. But there are a lot more subtle boundary issues in relationships. And so, you know, we start doing the work. First, you're just going to start to notice. I just want you to create awareness. Not to blame or shame you or anybody else, but just to notice, oh, what are the boundary issues in this scenario? And remember, if you're angry, oftentimes that can signal there's a boundary violation. Someone's not respecting you. They're not hearing you. You're not taking care of yourself. You know, we talked about needs last month, and I'm pretty sure by now you can see how asking for what you need and taking care of what you need, or respecting what someone else needs, has to do with boundaries. Has to. We can't honor our needs without having boundaries in our life. Sometimes just even the internal boundaries, the boundaries with ourselves, right? The self-discipline. So I want to take a moment before we finish out, and I want to do an exercise. Those of you who have listened to previous episodes will be familiar with this. We're going to do sentence endings. So if you're walking, if you're driving, if you're jogging, whatever you're doing, it's okay. Just try to come up with the answers in your head. You can go home and do them later and write them down. Ideally, if you can grab a pen and paper, that's wonderful. And the rule is just write down 3 to 6 endings really quickly. Don't think about your answers. Don't make them PC. Just grab and write or think in your head whatever first comes up. And typical is they're good, bad, and ugly. It's all the above. They're usually pretty balanced. Okay. And I'll give you time to do each one. See, here's number 1. Growing up, my boundaries were... Growing up, my boundaries were... Number 2, if I were honest about my boundaries. If I were honest about my boundaries. And number 3, if I looked at how I operate in my relationships today. If I looked at how I operate in my relationships today. Okay. So notice what came up for you and don't judge it. Don't flip out. Just let it be. The idea is that's your core truth. Maybe the vulnerable things that have been difficult to recognize or deal with. Or maybe you've done this before and there were no surprise answers there. There's always work to be done in this area. So again, no matter where you are on the continuum of what you know about boundaries and how healthy your boundaries are, there's always great work to be done. It's like we will always have to look at our nutrition and our physical health, right? I mean, that doesn't stop. You don't graduate and finish it. You have to keep doing it. I think it's the same thing with boundary work. I think we can always get healthier and healthier. I think, like I said earlier in the beginning, you might swing the pendulum in the complete opposite direction from passive behavior. No more doormat. And it's normal. It's not great, but it's normal to swing it all the way in the other direction and say, oh, hell no. I'm going to get my needs met. I'm going to kick everybody out of my bedroom. It's okay. Just remember we don't want to stay there because that's not really grounded and confident. Yeah, you're saying no. There's a belief that sometimes, we might do that to compensate for all the years that we dishonored ourselves, that our anger has been there because there's been boundary violations and on and on. So that's okay. Eventually we swing it back in the middle and to say, okay, I don't have to obliterate all my relationships to get what I need, to say no. I can learn to do that with some grace and some kindness and no judgment. I'm no longer angry at people. I just let them know where I am. So thank you for joining me today and starting this journey around a very important concept, I think, for empowerment and for every healthy relationship. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. Leave a positive review and let me know how this has been helpful so that other people can find this. The more people that find this and do this work, the healthier this world will become. Email me. Let me know how you're doing. If you have any questions, and I will try my best to answer them on the episodes, just email me at info@ownitpowercast.com and I will respond. And again, if it's something I can answer on the episode, I would certainly be happy to. So be proud of yourself today. You're taking on a huge concept and a very important one to look at, and it takes courage. It takes courage to listen, to learn, and take steps towards positive change. So pay it forward, keep focusing on you, and see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you can begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.